Many economists say that we will have a second quarter of contraction in the March quarter, is the results of which we'll get shortly. If it is, I think it will be a shallow recession. The New Zealand economy is very resilient. The goods we do want to sell to the world, people still want to buy. Our tourism has picked back up. So I feel that, if it does occur, that will happen. We've obviously had a cyclone in New Zealand in the first 3 months of the year. That will definitely draw down on GDP. It's affected a number of important food producing areas within New Zealand. So, the economists tell me we might have that recession, but it will be a shallow one.
I guess the corollary to that is whether or not the government actually has the fiscal firepower to deal with some of the challenges that you just described, particularly because the public finances were so stretched in the COVID years. How much leeway do you actually have to deal with the current challenges and challenges looking ahead to 2023, 2024?
We do have a strong set of government accounts. In terms of debt, our net debt remains under 20% of GDP, and I know when I talk to my colleagues from other countries here,
it's enviable.
Yeah, they would wish for that. So we do have balance sheet room to be able to deal with the issues that we've got now. And as I say, I do think there's a robustness and resilience in our economy overall, but that doesn't stop it being difficult for individual families and communities, and we obviously have to support them through that.
Well, inflation is still running at 7.2 percentage points. What I thought was interesting is recently the RBNZ, the central bank, surprised markets with a 50 basis point hike, whereas across the pond, Australia, they've paused. They started pausing. How pronounced is the inflation problem, and for how long are people going to have to put up with these very high levels of inflation, in your view?
Look, inflation has stuck around at a higher level for longer than people expected. I do take some heart in the fact that we're starting to see the quarterly and monthly increases come down. So while it's growing, the actual rate of increase has slowed down. So we are going to have to put up with it for a bit longer. Most people are projecting through into next year we start to get back down towards the 1 to 3% target range that our Reserve Bank have. But at least for the next year, we will be having to deal with higher rates of inflation than we've had in the past. We're working very hard to support our low and middle income families and households through that period of time, while not doing things that exacerbate inflation. So there's a fine balance for fiscal policy to support monetary policy, but we understand the importance of doing that.
Well, we've spent a lot of time here at the IMF talking about financial stability risk. Clearly, there have been a couple of episodes very far from New Zealand, but still notable because one of those financial turbulent events happens within the US. The regional banks over there caused a bit of a flare-up. Over in Europe as well, in Switzerland, we had the takeover of Credit Suisse. To what extent have these events around the world forced you to reevaluate how you're thinking about your own banking sector?
I'm really assured that when we've looked at our own banking and financial sector, it's very stable. There were some quite specific things that have caused the issues, particularly here in the US. For us, we have a fairly tight regulatory framework in which banks can operate. Even starting a bank in New Zealand, there is reasonably significant regulatory hurdles there. And then the capital requirements that are put on our retail banks by the Reserve Bank are fairly high too. So, we have a very stable banking sector. And while we always have to keep an eye on what happens in the wider financial markets, I'm very confident about the stability of our sector.
Well, New Zealand is one of the 2 countries in the world that does not have a deposit guarantee for banks. And if you go back and look at what happened with these recent flare-ups in the banking system, mainly the main catalyst was deposit outflows. Many people were afraid about the sanctity of their deposits, which led the government actually to intervene and come up with an explicit guarantee for some of these regional bank deposits. Is this a path that the government is considering going down as well within New Zealand?
It is, and in fact we have a piece of legislation before our Parliament at the moment to create a deposit guarantee scheme. We did that before these latest episodes. It came out of our review of the Reserve Bank that we did in 2018, and so the legislation for that will be passed before the end of 2023, and we're looking to have the scheme itself operational in 2024. We know that we need to provide better assurance to depositors. Clearly in the past, when there have been issues with finance companies in New Zealand, the government has stepped in. It's much better to have a deposit guarantee scheme that provides a more stable and clear pathway, and I'm very pleased that we had that legislation done and ready in Parliament when this all happened more recently.
And I know that there are plans for you to be meeting with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. What are some of the topics you're going to be discussing?
Yeah, well, it's very important to meet with the likes of Janet Yellen and others to understand firstly where US policy is going, which, as we said before, is very important. But we'll be talking a little bit about global financial issues. We're still very interested in the progress that the OECD is making around multinational taxation, which I know is an issue that Secretary Yellen also cares about a lot, so we'll be talking about that. But also, looking at issues like economic coercion and making sure that as a community globally, we're supporting particularly some of the smaller countries here, the Pacific Island countries who are in our neighbourhood, making sure that they're given all the support possible to be able to develop well. So those sorts of issues, regional ones in the Pacific, but also global.
Does the increasingly antagonistic relationship between the US and China pose a problem for New Zealand?
Well, certainly for New Zealand, both countries are very important to us. China is, our largest export market alongside Australia, but equally the US is an important market and one where we share a lot of values with the US administration. New Zealand has an independent foreign policy. We make decisions in the best interests of our country and our region, but we certainly, any kind of instability or division is something that New Zealand doesn't want to see, and we'll work closely with the US. They're a traditional friend of ours, and we share a lot together, and they have an important role in the Pacific as well to help increase stability.